Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. Morning, sleepyhead, Melissa said, her voice tinged with amusement. I've been looking at the weather forecast for Toronto. Seems like you're in for a pleasant trip. Orlando groaned, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. Don't remind me. I'm still not sure if I'm up for it. Melissa set her phone aside and turned to face her husband. You've been talking about this conference for months. Are you having second thoughts? It's not that, Orlando sighed, pushing himself up to a sitting position. I'm just not sure if I'm fully recovered from that nasty flu. The idea of traveling still makes me a bit queasy. Well, we could always cancel, Melissa suggested, though her tone indicated she didn't think it was the best option. But you've put so much work into your presentation. It would be a shame to miss out. Orlando nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. You're right. I've invested too much time and effort to back out now. Maybe I'm just nervous. That's understandable, Melissa said, reaching out to squeeze his hand. But you'll do great. You always do. A comfortable silence fell between them as Orlando mulled over his options. Finally, he spoke. What if I take the train instead of flying? It might be easier on my stomach, and I could use the extra time to review my notes. Melissa's face lit up. That's a brilliant idea, and you know how much you love train travel. It'll be like a mini adventure. Orlando chuckled, some of his apprehension melting away. You're right. It does sound more appealing than being crammed into an airplane. As they discussed the logistics of changing his travel plans, a mischievous glint appeared in Melissa's eye. You know, she said, her voice taking on a playful tone, if you're going by train, you could always make the trip more interesting. Orlando raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What do you have in mind? Melissa grinned. Well, you've always said you wanted to be more adventurous with your cross-dressing. Why not use this trip as an opportunity to really embrace it? Orlando's eyes widened, a mix of excitement and trepidation washing over him. You mean travel on Fem? The whole way? Why not? Melissa shrugged. You'll be in a different city, surrounded by strangers. It's the perfect chance to fully express yourself without worrying about running into anyone you know. Orlando bit his lip, considering the proposal. It was true that he'd been wanting to push his boundaries, to explore this side of himself more fully. But the idea of doing it so publicly for an extended period was both thrilling and terrifying. I don't know, he said hesitantly. What if someone from the conference recognizes me? Melissa laughed. Orlando, darling, you're a master of transformation. Half the time, I barely recognize you when you're all dolled up. I doubt anyone from work would have a clue. Her confidence was infectious, and Orlando found himself warming to the idea. It would be quite the adventure, he mused, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Exactly! Melissa exclaimed, her enthusiasm growing. And you can always pack some of your usual clothes, just in case you need to switch back for the actual conference. Orlando nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. All right, he said, his voice firm with newfound determination. Let's do it. I accept your challenge, my dear. Melissa clapped her hands in delight. Wonderful. Now, let's start planning your wardrobe. We want you to be the belle of the train, after all. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Orlando and Melissa pored over his collection of feminine attire, carefully selecting outfits for each day of the trip. They debated the merits of different wigs, practiced makeup techniques, and even went shopping for a few new accessories to complete his looks. As the departure date approached, Orlando found himself growing increasingly excited. The nervousness was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but it was overshadowed by a sense of anticipation. This was more than just a work trip now. It was an opportunity for self-discovery and expression. The night before his departure, Orlando stood in front of the full-length mirror in their bedroom, meticulously packing his garment bag. Melissa perched on the edge of the bed, offering advice and encouragement. "Don't forget to pack your forms," she reminded him, "and make sure you have enough pantyhose. You know how easily they can run." Orlando nodded, carefully folding a silky blouse. "Got it. I've also packed a suit and tie just in case I need to switch back for the conference." Melissa smiled, watching her husband with pride. "You've thought of everything. You're going to have an amazing time. I just know it." As he zipped up the garment bag, Orlando turned to face his wife. "I couldn't do this without you, you know. Your support means everything to me." Melissa stood and wrapped her arms around him. "I love you, Orlando. All of you. This is part of who you are, and I'm honored that you share it with me." The morning of departure arrived, and Orlando woke early, his stomach fluttering with a mix of excitement and nerves. He showered, taking extra care to shave closely, then began the transformation process. Melissa helped him apply his makeup, her steady hand perfecting his eyeliner and blending his eyeshadow. They chose a shoulder-length auburn wig, styling it into soft waves that framed his face beautifully. For his travel outfit, Orlando selected a comfortable yet stylish ensemble, a flowing knee-length skirt in a deep burgundy paired with a cream-colored blouse and a fitted blazer. He slipped on a pair of low heels, not wanting to overdo it for the long train ride. As he stood before the mirror, making final adjustments to his appearance, Melissa appeared behind him, a pearl necklace in her hands. "The finishing touch," she said softly, fastening it around his neck. Orlando touched the pearls gently, his eyes misting over. "They're beautiful. Thank you." Melissa squeezed his shoulders. "You're beautiful. Now, let's get you to the station before you miss your train." The drive to the train station was a quiet one, both of them lost in thought. As they pulled up to the drop-off area, Orlando took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Melissa turned to him, her eyes shining with love and encouragement. "You've got this, Orlando. Remember, you're not just pretending to be someone else. This is a part of you, and it's beautiful." Orlando nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I love you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you too," Melissa replied. "Now go show the world how fabulous you are." With a final kiss, Orlando stepped out of the car, straightening his skirt and adjusting his wig. He grabbed his suitcase and garment bag, then turned to wave goodbye to Melissa as she drove away. Taking another deep breath, Orlando made his way into the station, his heels clicking confidently on the polished floor. He was aware of a few curious glances, but no one seemed to pay him much attention. It was rush hour, after all, and people were more concerned with catching their trains than scrutinizing their fellow passengers. As he approached the ticket counter, Orlando felt a momentary flutter of panic. This was his first real interaction as his feminine alter ego. But as he opened his mouth to speak, he was surprised by the ease with which his practiced feminine voice emerged. "Good morning," he said softly. "I have a reservation for the 9:15 to Toronto." The ticket agent, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, smiled at him. "Of course, ma'am. May I see your ID?" Orlando's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't thought about this part. Fumbling slightly, he produced his driver's license, which clearly showed his male name and photo. The agent glanced at the ID, then back at Orlando, her expression unchanged. "Thank you, sir," she said smoothly, handing back the license along with his ticket. "You'll be in car 7, seat 12A. Have a pleasant journey." Relieved and somewhat amazed at the agent's professionalism, Orlando thanked her and made his way to the platform. As he waited for the train, he couldn't help but feel a surge of confidence. He'd passed his first test with flying colors. The train arrived right on schedule, and Orlando boarded, finding his seat with ease. He stowed his luggage and settled in, smoothing his skirt as he sat. An elderly couple took the seats across from him, offering friendly smiles, which he returned warmly. As the train pulled out of the station, Orlando felt a sense of exhilaration wash over him. He was doing it. He was truly embracing this part of himself, out in the world, and so far it felt wonderful. The journey passed pleasantly. Orlando alternated between reviewing his conference notes and simply enjoying the scenery rushing by outside the window. He made polite conversation with his seatmates, delighting in their easy acceptance of him. At one point, he excused himself to use the restroom, navigating the narrow aisle with practiced grace. In the tiny cubicle, he touched up his makeup and adjusted his wig, marveling at his reflection. The person staring back at him was both familiar and excitingly new. As the train neared Toronto, Orlando felt a mix of sadness that this part of his journey was ending and anticipation for what lay ahead. He'd proven to himself that he could do this, that he could exist in the world as this version of himself. Disembarking at Union Station, Orlando felt a renewed sense of confidence. He navigated the busy terminal with ease, his heels clicking purposefully on the tiled floor. As he emerged onto the bustling streets of Toronto, he took a moment to orient himself, consulting the map on his phone to find his hotel. The walk to the hotel was invigorating. Orlando reveled in the anonymity of the big city, enjoying the freedom to simply be himself without fear of recognition. He caught sight of his reflection in shop windows as he passed, admiring the way his skirt swayed with each step and how natural he looked in this feminine attire. Arriving at the hotel, Orlando approached the check-in desk with a mix of excitement and trepidation. This would be another test of his ability to pass as his feminine alter ego. "Good afternoon," he said softly to the receptionist, a young man with a friendly smile. "I have a reservation under the name Orlando Kaufman." The receptionist tapped at his computer, then looked up with a slight frown. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I'm not seeing a reservation under that name. Could it be under a different name, perhaps?" Orlando felt a momentary panic. Had there been a mistake with his booking? Then he realized his error. He'd given his male name while presenting as female. "Oh, I'm so sorry," he said, fumbling in his purse for his ID. "The reservation is under my husband's name. Here's the confirmation email." He showed the receptionist his phone, along with his driver's license. The young man's eyes widened slightly in understanding, but he quickly composed himself. "Of course, Mrs. Kaufman. My apologies for the confusion. I've found your reservation now. You'll be in room 712. Here's your key card, and please let us know if you need anything during your stay." Orlando thanked him, impressed once again by the professionalism he'd encountered. As he made his way to the elevator, he couldn't help but smile at being addressed as Mrs. Kaufman. It felt surprisingly natural. In his room, Orlando took a moment to catch his breath and reflect on the day's journey. He'd successfully traveled across the country, interacted with numerous people, and checked into a hotel, all while presenting as female. It was an exhilarating feeling. After freshening up and changing into a more evening-appropriate outfit, a sleek black dress with a modest neckline and hemline just above the knee, Orlando decided to treat himself to dinner at the hotel's upscale restaurant. He deserved a celebration after such a successful day. The restaurant was dimly lit and elegant, with soft jazz playing in the background. Orlando was shown to a small table near the window, offering a beautiful view of the city skyline as the sun began to set. As he perused the menu, sipping a glass of white wine, Orlando noticed a man at the bar glancing in his direction. The man was younger, perhaps in his early 30s, with dark hair and a well-fitted suit. After a moment, the man stood and approached Orlando's table. "Excuse me," he said, his voice warm and slightly accented. "I hope I'm not being too forward, but I couldn't help noticing you from across the room. Would you mind if I joined you?" Orlando felt a flutter of both excitement and apprehension. This was unexpected territory. He'd never been approached like this while in his feminine persona before. I suppose that would be all right," he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. The man sat down, flashing a charming smile. "I'm Gian," he said, extending his hand. "And you are?" Orlando hesitated for a split second before responding. "Debbie," he said, the name coming to him spontaneously. "It's nice to meet you, Gian." As they began to chat, Orlando found himself slipping easily into the role of Debbie. He kept his voice soft and feminine, laughing at Gian's jokes and maintaining an air of gentle flirtation. It was thrilling to be seen and appreciated as a woman, even if it wasn't entirely real. Gian, it turned out, was in Toronto for a conference at the university, the same conference Orlando was attending, though he didn't mention this. As they talked, Orlando began to realize that Gian's face seemed vaguely familiar, but he couldn't quite place him. Their conversation flowed easily, touching on topics from travel to literature to current events. Orlando was impressed by Gian's intelligence and wit, finding himself genuinely enjoying the interaction beyond just the novelty of the situation. "So, Debbie," Gian said, leaning in slightly,
"what brings a beautiful woman like you to Toronto? Business or pleasure?"
Orlando sipped his wine, buying time to formulate a response.
"A bit of both, actually," he said carefully. "I'm here for work, but I'm hoping to enjoy the city as well."
Gian's eyes lit up. "What a coincidence! I'm here for work, too. Perhaps we could explore the city together. I'd love to take you out properly, show you some of Toronto's hidden gems." Orlando felt a sudden pang of guilt. This had gone further than he'd intended, and he realized he needed to put a stop to it before things got too complicated. "Gian," he said gently, "I'm very flattered by your attention, truly, but I'm afraid I have to decline." Gian's face fell slightly. "Oh, is there someone else?" Orlando twisted the wedding ring on his finger, which he'd deliberately left on as part of his disguise. "Yes, actually, I'm married."
Gian's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed slightly. "I see. I apologize if I've made you uncomfortable. I should have noticed the ring." "No need to apologize," Orlando said quickly. "It's been a lovely evening, and I've enjoyed our conversation immensely, but I think it's best if we leave things here."
Gian nodded, his expression a mix of disappointment and respect.
"Of course. Thank you for your honesty, Debbie. I hope you enjoy the rest of your stay in Toronto."
With that, Gian excused himself and returned to the bar. Orlando finished his meal in contemplative silence, his mind whirling with the events of the evening. It had been an unexpected turn, but one that had ultimately reinforced his commitment to his marriage and to Melissa. As he made his way back to his room, Orlando felt a renewed appreciation for his wife and her unwavering support. He couldn't wait to share this experience with her. The next morning, Orlando woke early, his mind already shifting gears to focus on the conference ahead. He showered, washing away the last traces of makeup and femininity, then carefully styled his own short hair. Standing before the mirror, he methodically transformed back into his male self. He donned a white shirt, dark gray suit, and a deep blue tie that Melissa had given him for their last anniversary. As he knotted the tie, he couldn't help but reflect on the stark contrast between this version of himself and the one who had dined in the restaurant just hours ago. Feeling fully settled into his masculine persona, Orlando headed down to the hotel restaurant for breakfast. As he entered, he noticed a familiar face. Gian was seated at a table near the window, sipping coffee and reading a newspaper. For a moment, Orlando froze, unsure of how to proceed. Would Gian recognize him? But as he approached the breakfast buffet, Gian looked up and their eyes met. To Orlando's relief and fascination, there was no spark of recognition in Gian's gaze. "Good morning," Gian said politely, with the casual friendliness of one conference attendee to another.
"Good morning,"
Orlando replied, nodding in acknowledgement. As he filled his plate, Orlando marveled at the effectiveness of his transformation. The man who had flirted so charmingly with Debbie the night before now saw him as nothing more than another male colleague. After finishing his breakfast, Orlando gathered his materials for the conference and headed towards the exit. To his surprise, he found Gian waiting by the door, looking at his watch. "Excuse me," Gian said,
his tone friendly but professional. "Are you heading to the university for the conference? I was thinking of calling a taxi, but it might be more economical to share if you're going the same way." Orlando hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, I am. Sharing a taxi sounds like a good idea."
As they waited for the taxi, they made polite small talk, introducing themselves properly. Orlando learned that Gian was a visiting professor from Italy, specializing in the same field as Orlando. It was surreal to have this conversation with someone who had been so intimately flirtatious just hours before. The taxi ride to the university was filled with academic discussion, both men sharing their research interests and debating recent developments in their field. Orlando found himself genuinely enjoying the intellectual exchange, seeing Gian in a completely different light than he had the previous evening. As they arrived at the university, Gian turned to Orlando with a smile.
"It was a pleasure meeting you, Orlando. Perhaps we'll have a chance to continue our discussion later in the conference."
Orlando nodded, returning the smile.
"Likewise, Gian. I look forward to it."
They parted ways as they entered the conference center, each heading to different sessions. Orlando couldn't help but shake his head in amazement at the situation. The duality of his experience was both thrilling and slightly disorienting. The conference itself was a whirlwind of presentations, panel discussions, and networking opportunities. Orlando's own presentation was well received, sparking interesting questions and debates. He found himself fully immersed in his professional role, the events of the previous evening feeling almost like a dream. Throughout the day, Orlando caught glimpses of Gian in various sessions and during coffee breaks. Each time, their interactions were perfectly cordial and professional, with no hint that Gian connected him to the woman he had met in the restaurant. As the conference drew to a close, Orlando felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had successfully navigated both his professional obligations and his personal exploration, keeping the two worlds separate yet equally fulfilling. Returning to the hotel, Orlando began to pack his belongings, carefully folding both his masculine and feminine attire. He was looking forward to sharing the entire experience with Melissa, knowing she would be both amused and proud of his adventure. Just as he was about to head down to check out, there was a knock at his door. Puzzled, Orlando opened it to find Gian standing there, a slightly sheepish expression on his face. "Orlando," Gian said, his voice hesitant, "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I wanted to apologize." Orlando frowned, genuinely confused.
"Apologize for what?"
Gian ran a hand through his hair, looking uncomfortable.
I'm not sure how to say this. Last night at the restaurant, I met a woman, Debbie, and I flirted with her rather aggressively."
Orlando felt his heart rate increase, but he kept his expression neutral.
"I see,"
he said carefully. "And why are you telling me this?"
Gian sighed. "Because I've just realized that Debbie was you. In the lobby just now, I saw you checking out, and something about your movements, your gestures. It suddenly clicked. I feel terrible for not respecting your privacy, for approaching you like that."
For a moment, Orlando was speechless. He hadn't expected to be confronted with this situation, especially not at the last minute. But as he looked at Gian's genuinely remorseful expression, he felt a wave of relief and even gratitude.
"Gian," he said softly, "you have nothing to apologize for. You didn't know, and you were a perfect gentleman when I explained I was married. If anything, I should apologize for the deception."
Gian shook his head vigorously.
No. You don't owe me or anyone else an explanation. I just wanted you to know that your secret is safe with me and that I deeply respect your courage."
Orlando felt a lump forming in his throat.
"Thank you, Gian. That means a great deal to me."
They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken understanding. Finally, Gian extended his hand.
"It was a pleasure meeting you, Orlando. All of you. I hope our paths cross again someday, in whatever context you're comfortable with."
Orlando shook Gian's hand, feeling a profound sense of acceptance.
"Likewise, Gian. Thank you for your understanding."
As Gian walked away, Orlando closed the door and leaned against it, his emotions swirling. This unexpected confrontation had brought his two worlds together in a way he hadn't anticipated, but it had also affirmed the validity of both aspects of his identity. With a deep breath, Orlando gathered his luggage and headed down to check out. As he made his way to the train station, he felt a newfound sense of integration between the different facets of his personality. This trip had been more than just an adventure in cross-dressing. It had been a journey of self-discovery and acceptance. On the train ride home, Orlando alternated between reviewing the notes from the conference and reflecting on his experiences as Debbie. He felt a growing excitement to share everything with Melissa, knowing she would be thrilled by every detail. As the familiar landscape of home came into view, Orlando felt a profound sense of gratitude. He was returning not just with new professional knowledge, but with a deeper understanding of himself and the unwavering support of both his wife and, unexpectedly, a new acquaintance. The train pulled into the station, and Orlando spotted Melissa waiting on the platform, her face beaming with anticipation. As he stepped off the train, she rushed to embrace him. "Welcome home, my love," she whispered in his ear. "I can't wait to hear all about your adventure." Orlando hugged her tightly, feeling the dual nature of his experience settle comfortably within him.
"Oh, Melissa,"
he said, his voice filled with emotion.
"You won't believe what happened."
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.